Hello, bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, on parlera de Emmanuel Carrere. So today we will speak of Emmanuel Carrere. I wish my French was more confident and my accent was a little better. It might sound less awkward. So the real question before we get started, while we're still doing our introduction, is the question of what does identity mean to you? If everything about yourself suddenly came into doubt around all of the people around you, if your parents and your friends suddenly thought you were somebody you weren't, how would you handle the situation? Would you try to rebuild your character? Or would you have a complete meltdown? If people around you thought you were going to write something different, or if people thought that maybe you were just a nice immigrant somewhere, how would that change your perception of something? What about religion and faith? Have you ever had your faith challenged to such a way that it changes who you are? These are all parts of questions that are answered in Emmanuel Carrere's novels, or at least pondered. I wouldn't say these questions all have exact answers. So, again, I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. So to start with Emmanuel Carrere, we're going to do something slightly different today. Emmanuel Carrere has distinct styles of books. Now, it's somewhat of a question whether to call what he does fiction, because ostensibly, most of the writing has things that have actually happened in it. He does have a period of fiction, and that's where we'll start. But in general, the question of what exactly makes writing fiction is important here. The other thing I want to say is that I have not read all of Emmanuel Carrere's books. It's difficult to read all of them. He's got a few different styles and genres. Some of them are more essayistic. I've read 10 books by Emmanuel Carrere, and he is one of my favorite living writers. So what we're going to do is split this up into 4 parts, and there are 4 distinct styles of books there, and we'll go from there. The first type of book we're going to talk about is conventional fiction. Now, Emmanuel Carrere has written a few different types of books, but as you'll see here, I have 2 novels of conventional fiction, Le Moustache and La Classe de Neige. And in general, these books are often published today in English. They are sometimes grouped together. They're his most notable works of conventional fiction. I do believe there was a science fiction work that he wrote that won some type of award, but La Classe de Neige won a major award, Le Prix Femina, and that award is not on the level of a Goncourt, but it's like a Penn Faulkner kind of award. It's certainly not nothing, it's just not the biggest. I'm not showing you the cover of Le Moustache because my cover has a very old illustration of a naked man on it. It's a cartoon. And I don't know what I can and can't get in trouble for on YouTube exactly. I have a good idea, but I'm not going to show that to the camera. So, Le Moustache is the work of his conventional fiction that I love. To me, Le Moustache is, it's like a Philip K. Dick mixed with a Franz Kafka kind of story. And in addition, he really hammers that idea of identity, that kind of existential crisis. So the book basically, a man shaves his mustache, and then the world all of a sudden thinks he's a totally different person. And when I say totally different person, I don't mean like, oh, he's suddenly so charming. I mean, people literally don't recognize him. And the book basically tracks this kind of magical mustache and its progression on the rest of the world. In general, I'd say it's a great book. It has some country traveling. The main character at one point goes to Japan, and other than that, I would say it's really pretty much an S tier book. There's a little section around the third quarter of the book that I think is maybe not quite as good as it could be. It's a little slow, but in general, Le Moustache is great. Le Classe de Neige is also pretty great. The book basically follows the thoughts of a young man as he's working through some things, some fears about invaders and how elderly people might abuse him. Not elderly, but more older than himself. And he's basically on a class field trip. I thought the book was okay. I would probably give it about a B. So I'm not going to show my cover of Le Moustache for the reasons I said, but as you can see, Le Moustache, Le Classe de Neige, they're both in English, normally, as I've seen them published under the same volume. They're both very good. So Le Moustache is definitely much better, but Le Classe de Neige is not a bad novella. So S and B tier. The second type of book I want to look at is his true crime. And basically, these two books are L'Adversaire and Vendredi 13, or V13. And we'll start with L'Adversaire. I feel a little uncomfortable discussing V13 online, and I'll get to that in 1 second. L'Adversaire is about Le Roman, right? Le Roman case. I've seen online every once in a while something will pop up in English language media about this case. I think the main reason as many people know about it in English language media as they do is probably because of this book. But L'Adversaire is a true crime, and I would call it a novel, but it is nonfiction. So Carrere thought of In Cold Blood when he was writing the book, but more than that, just the fact that it's reviewing murders makes that very essential. So Roman murdered, I think it's 6 people in total. There's 5 people he was charged for, and there's a person who they think he may have killed, but it was never proven in court. But basically, this is the biggest identity crisis in a story I have ever seen in my life, the way that Emmanuel Carrere tells this. So, the way the story is related, essentially we follow Roman growing up, and we see his life and the way that he has constructed elaborate lies about his person. So he's a doctor with decorations, is what he tells people, and he's this, that, and the other thing, and he's lying to institutions, and he's successfully lying to these institutions. And one day, it's basically discovered that he's not who he says he is, and that the extent of the lies isn't really uncovered at that point, but he's very much not who he says he is and who everybody thinks he was. And a normal, healthy person might have some kind of psychotic break under the situation that suddenly their whole families are going to be viewing them very differently, or a grown man may have a heart attack. What is in the realm of absurdity and horror is that Roman essentially decides that the way that he's going to handle having been discovered to be sort of fraud is to basically murder everybody in his life who is strongly impacted by the extent of his lies. He's so unable to accept the idea that these people would not view him in this beatific light that he goes out and kills 5 or 6 people. Now, I said the style of this book is reminiscent of In Cold Blood, but the big difference is that Carrere, he does include himself in the story. It's not a very big part of his inclusions, but of the book, but he's definitely there, reflecting at different times and bringing himself into the story. Capote in Cold Blood was very absent from the book. He kind of pretended like he was this omniscient narrator. Carrere, we have a very subjective idea of this, and what I think it does exceptionally well is that it allows him to build a mythos around Ramon, where this is not just that he was discovered for being something that he wasn't, and he was a lunatic, so he murdered people. Instead, what we're seeing is that there was an entire myth. There was a story. You understand what I'm saying? There was this idea. He had built up all these things for himself. He had said that he was this, that, and the other thing, and the whole world came crashing down on him when it was discovered that he was not the doctor that he said he was. So, truthfully, I read this book a couple years ago. I don't know exactly when. So there are a few details of the story that I don't remember, but it's a shocking book. It's incredibly entertaining, and it's a pretty short read. These French novels don't have a huge amount of text on the page, and this is only about 220 pages. So I think if you buy this in an English copy, you're probably looking at about 175 pages. L'Adversaire is an S tier for me. The truth is that it's almost irrelevant for me to rate Emmanuel Carrere, because, as I said, I think he's one of my favorite living writers. So every single one of these books is going to be probably higher than some other people may rank it, but I do think that he's genuinely very interesting from a literary standpoint. So who he is here is kind of a journalist. He gets involved in the Ramon case. He ends up assisting Ramon with certain legal things to get information from him. So he's bringing himself into the story for good reason. So S tier book. The second book, Vitres, is about a Parisian terrorist attack. So I'm going to just read and quick translate the back of this book for you. But 14 accused, 1,800 civil people, 350 lawyers, and it sounds like a list of documents that's 53 meters high. So what this basically is about is that on a Friday 13th in, when was it? 2015. There were a lot of people who were killed. 130 due to a terrorist attack. And the people who perpetrated the attack, it was an Islamist, extremist political attack. What the book is, and this is subtitled Chronique Judiciaire, and it's basically a collection of Carrere's reporting on this situation. What we end up getting is perspectives of everyone from the lawyers involved in the case to perpetrators to the family members of perpetrators. And believe it or not, in a way, we do still deal with identity. So we've talked about 3 books, really 2 major ones in Classe de Liège, un peu. In general, the idea is identity is present in pretty much everything. And this really comes down to Vitres when we're looking at the family members of the assailants. They don't really know where this came from. And what we end up finding is that not only do they not know where this came from for the people who perpetrated it, but the people who perpetrated the attack don't really understand their own motivations. They have these grand ideas about religious strife and oppression and systematic wrongdoing, but this is kind of, and forgive me for slightly making sense of this, but I think it's a South Park meme where you have the idea, question mark, profit. This is sort of a situation where the terrorists seem to think, okay, so the terrorists are going to have the terror attack, profit. They don't really know what's going to happen next, yet they expect something to go from the attack. There's no planned follow-through. There's no in-case situation. They're kind of just all in on inflicting this massive harm. The book is written in a few different styles. We've got basically very creative newspaper writing. So if you're talking about the writing, it's like it's a very high-class journal. I forget where he was reporting for. Essentially, he's got these very complicated, very exuberantly written reflections on going through the court case. I'm not going to rank this book. I will not rank this book for the simple fact that this is a little too close to home, I think, probably, for people who were victims of just insane violence for no reason. Just completely innocent people. It's not a novel, so it doesn't fall into the realm of Don DeLillo's Falling Man exactly. And I feel more comfortable commenting on a book like DeLillo's Falling Man because I'm an American. I don't know whether to say I spent time in France or I very briefly lived in France for a couple months. That's part of the reason why I know French. It's not the main reason. And my French isn't great, as you can probably tell. But I can read in it. But it's not my place to rate this book. I really enjoyed the writing. I think it's a really good book. I question its international sales record, although it was recognized for an international prize. But in general, I don't feel comfortable saying this is an S-tier book, or it's a D-tier book, or it's a B-tier book. This is kind of like a work of history, but very almost by somebody who was there. Carrere wasn't literally there, but he was there for the court case, and he was really in this court case. So this is a very engaging book, but I just don't know how to rate it and show respect. The next book we're going to look at, the next two, are two other books that I love. And we have Je suis vivant et vous êtes mort, and Limonov. Now, I wish I could tell you that I had read Edouard Limonov. We don't really read Limonov in the Anglophone world. I had never heard of him before seeing this book. In Russia, that's a little different. And especially in the 80s, when there was a lot of the Cold War fears, Limonov enjoyed a celebrity in both the US and especially in France. Je suis vivant et vous êtes mort is the story of Philip K. Dick. Now, part of the reason I got into Philip K. Dick was because Emmanuel Carrere is he's a dickhead. He's a PKD fan, enough so that he wrote a biography of him. So I've read 12 Philip K. Dick books. What I wish I could say was that I wish Philip K. Dick as a person and a writer was as interesting a person and a writer as Limonov was, or appears to be. What this essentially is, and a major problem with the way this is published, is that this is a novel. Now, biographical fiction exists in the U.S. It's not something that no one's ever heard of. T.C. Boyle has a book that's very famous on, I think, Frank Lloyd Wright, called The Women. And, it's a fictionalized story, but it's somewhat biographical around that person. This is like something between that kind of fictional story, like a biopic, and a serious biography. It's certainly much drier, and I don't mean that in a negative way. That's the wrong word to use. But it's certainly much more contemplative than your average fiction. But at the same time, the way the reflections are told, we're getting a lot of Philip K. Dick's subjectivity here that's postulated. We don't have ways to verify Philip K. Dick's thoughts at these moments. And so the story sits in this weird realm between biography of Philip K. Dick and novel about Philip K. Dick's life. We get a lot of stuff about his books. He took a lot of drugs, and that's in the story as well. There's a weird meeting with some government officials. I like the book. It's not my favorite one of Carrere's books. This might get the lowest rating aside from La Classe de Neige, despite that I'm a quote-unquote dickhead myself, a PKD fan. Yeah, let's give this a B. What I want to say is that if you want to read a novel about a writer, I mean, sometimes that's just like what you're craving. You want to read a book about a writer. It sounds like an interesting story. He's successful. He's writing off the beaten path. He was a sci-fi pulp writer. He wasn't our typical literary great, exactly. And you want to see the confusion around his life and so on. This is worth reading. I believe the English language translation is like this bulky blue book that has like, and what if Philip K. Dick is XYZ or something on the cover and a little subtitle. The way that it's being marketed, I don't think does a. They're marketing it wrong. This is the way the book should be sold. We know the subject of the painting. That's Philip K. Dick, and the painting is the book. We see him with his cat. We've got the title. There's no subtitle. So I think this is a really entertaining book. It's not the best. It's somewhat forgettable, but it's enjoyable all the way through. So let's give this a B. The second one of Emmanuel Carrere's biographies is Limonov. And I'm making this review having never read Limonov. So Limonov was essentially a right-wing totalitarian, but he got his start in. He's a political figure. He's an accomplished writer. He's a poet. He's a punk. He's a butler. He's all these things, and he's all these things at different times for different people. So. When we last see Limonov in existence, he is a politician. And he's been in war. He was part of a putsch. His politics are, for me, completely abhorrent. He was a far-right figure. But that's not really the whole story of Limonov. He's sort of like a Rimbaud type figure. Rimbaud, Arthur Rimbaud, the young French poet who famously wrote until he was, say, 17 or 18. He was very young. He wrote for like 3 years or something, 4 years. And then he explored Europe briefly and made his way down to Africa, where he's known as a gun salesman, even though that was actually a very small part of his biography. What he really did was sell coffee. But he sold coffee. But yeah, when you read Rimbaud, you're left thinking like, oh my God, how could like number one, basically a teenager be this brilliant? Number two, like who is this person that he's going from being a world famous poet to a warlord? Effectively, he's selling guns to a military in Africa. Limonov goes from USSR Russia, and he's poor and working class kid. He leaves for the United States, and after that, stuff just goes crazy. He becomes a butler for an incredibly wealthy man, and then this whole time he's writing, he winds up in Europe participating in like a putsch. And then he's in prison in Russia, and he's getting sprung from the prison. Like people are breaking him out of prison. I think there's a murder pinned on him, if I remember right, or at least somebody dies in the prison break. He ends up signing some paper and agreeing to only say certain things in public, and the Russian government lets him out of prison so that he looks like a military hero and a great artist. I haven't read any of his work. I'm kind of interested in one novel, but it's immaterial to this biography. And this is what I'm talking about with the Philip K. Dick biography. This reads just like a great biography of somebody you've never heard of who just did a bunch of crazy stuff. If it were 100 years before this, but the same plot, it would have sounded like a Joseph Conrad novel. That's what happens with Rimbaud. You read Rimbaud's letters and the notes on Rimbaud's letters, and it sounds like a Joseph Conrad novel. So this is an S-tier book in my book. This is for everybody also. This is for people who do not know a thing about Limonov, have no interest in his politics, no interest in his writing, just interest in Emmanuel Carrere and French literature. It's so entertaining. You will be going through each page asking, like, who is this? Like, how did this really happen? It's just so unbelievable, the story, and that it's a real story is even crazier. So this is an S-tier book. So we've got, 6 of Emmanuel Carrere's books, and 3 of them, in my opinion, are S tier. So take that for what it's worth. Is it 3? No, we've got 2 S tiers. We've got a book I'm refusing to rate, and a B tier book, or 2 B tiers. So take that for what it's worth. And Vitres is a good book. It's just I won't rate it. I don't want to judge it on quality. It's probably too close to home for some people. Finally, the final works that we're going to look at are Emmanuel Carrere's actual biographies, or not biographies, his memoirs. His memoirs read kind of like Philip Roth novels, and when I say that, I mean in terms of his use of reflection and his style of the narrative. I don't mean that he's a Philip Roth type figure, because Emmanuel Carrere as a figure is kind of like a sporty journalist, sort of. Not exactly sporty, but like you'd expect to see him in like a long john shirt and some camo cargo pants and his buzzed head, and you'd expect him to be interviewing somebody who would just be like Limonov, for example, some crazy out there figure. So his personality and what he brings to the text is this kind of journalistic acumen, as well as a personality. And before we go on to the memoirs, one thing I do want to say is that, and it happens in Limonov as well, sometimes he reflects on himself, and it feels a little pompous and a little self-assured. And part of me wonders if that's not the point, because what he's doing is he's putting himself in the story, and his opinions naturally take precedence over everything else because he's the writer. But if he turns you off a little bit about himself, but you're still really interested in the other person that he's talking about, is that kind of the point? Because it makes the other person more interesting. So I'm not going to review these in publication order. I'm just going in the way I had them on the shelf. which for this time was not publication order. The first of these memoirs is Un roman russe, and a Russian novel. I cannot stand the way that Carrere is marketed in the U.S. I don't like his book covers. It looks too kind of poppy, I guess. I think this is fitting for the book, just the person swimming. So in Un roman russe, there's the story is about Carrere going to Russia to make a film. And it's basically just the story of the film. He's married. He talks about how his thoughts about other women briefly, if I remember right. And there's a scene in here that I remember very strongly that I found incredibly endearing. And it's funny because eventually I believe he and his wife of this memoir got divorced not too many years later. It was a few years, but not too much long later. And in this book, he's just talking about how much he loves her, and it's a very poetic section of the book. The other thing that he does is he examines his history some. So we've got more about identity. And Carrere's mother was in the Académie Française, which is incredibly prestigious. I mentioned in my Bukowski video how Denis Leferrier was in there. So I've mentioned the Académie Française as a hub for literary talent before. But his mother was a historian. His grandfather, I don't know remember whether it was on the mother or father's side though, held some pretty abhorrent politics around World War II era. And I believe he sided with the fascists. So that's in here, and Carrere grapples with that. Overall, this is a great book. It's not my favorite book ever, but let's say this is either an A or an S. Let's give this an A. D'autres vies que la mienne et la prochaine. Other Lives Than Mine is the next. And this is essentially a book where he delves completely into other people. And for that, I want to give this an S tier. I'm just telling you right off the bat. The people that he's delving into are mostly people who are suffering from critical diseases or handicaps, things of that nature. And he's essentially showing how they survive or how they persevere through these difficult situations. The way the novel is, or the way the memoir is written, or the reportage, whatever the word should be, is that it's kind of like a story with several different main characters, and he's kind of just going through each of the characters. So the ending, for that reason, is a little lackluster because it's just one person after the other. At the same time, the intent of the book and the actual experience of reading it make it just so pleasurable and so great that I'm giving this an S as well. Next, we're going to look at Le Royaume. And Le Royaume is his biography or his memoir, essentially about his time in Christianity. So Carrere was a Christian for a period of time and very devoted to his ideas about Christianity. And what he does in Le Royaume is he splits up these reflections about his time in Christianity with meditation on the early church founding. This is my least favorite of these memoirs. I wanted to love this book. I love Carrere. This is one of the last books of his that I read. But it's just not quite as good as the others. You will see people online who kind of complain about it. I've seen on BookTube a few different reviews of The Kingdom, which is what it's called in English. And they don't seem to be effusive, I guess is a way to put it. Another thing is I wanted to love this book because there's apparently, I don't remember the part on masturbation, but there's a part on masturbation that Wikipedia says got a professor fired because he was teaching a theology class and he chose to read this book. What I do remember of the book is kind of a tone. you're not getting like the super exciting parts of the founding of the church. There's no blood and guts in here. It's generally kind of more contemplative, conversational type writing. And since I'm not a Christian, it becomes very difficult for me always to appreciate the profundity of what is occurring in the novel. I don't have much else to say. Let's give this a B as well. And finally, what I'm going to look at is Yoga. And Yoga made a bit of a splash when it was published recently because his ex-wife, the wife from Un Roman Russe, wanted to remove part of the book. So the book was published with essentially a section going about his divorce missing. Now, when I read this book, I was sold on the idea that he was going to be examining his bipolar disorder. He was diagnosed bipolar when he was writing this. Instead, we get mostly the discussion of his meditation retreat and his yoga practice. And that's interesting, but it's not necessarily what I signed up for. I do think that overall, though, the novel is still, I'm going to give this an S. In the end of the book, he is teaching refugees about French writing in French. We see a love scene between him and a woman he meets, and the book overall is great. So this is an S tier. Okay, so let's do an overview of what the ratings are for all the books. Now, since I had organized the video according to genre more than time period, this is going to be kind of out of order anyway. So what I'm going to do is review the books according to their grade level, and we'll go about it that way. We're going to start low and work our way to high. So the first two books, or the first three books that we'll note are his three B-tier books. So the three B-tier books are La Classe de Neige, Je suis vivant et vous êtes mort, and Le Royaume. So he's got three books in B tier. That's his lowest tier. As I said, he's one of my favorite living writers, so this might be a little biased. Now, he's only got one A tier. And that one A tier is Un Roman Russe. And I really do recommend this to everybody. For me, this might as well be an S tier. I'm keeping it an A tier so that we have a somewhat more balanced opinion of him. Now, the last books, and this is what I'm saying about being ridiculous. He's got more S tiers than any other writer that I've reviewed so far. But again, I love the project. So we've got 5 S tier books. The 5 S tier books are Le Moustache, which I'm not going to show because I don't want to get any kind of trouble for showing an old art that has male genitals in it. Limanoff. So Le Moustache, Limanoff, L'Adversaire, Yoga, and D'autres Vies que la Mienne. All of those I really do stand by as being S-tier books. The only book that I think is really debatable would be Le Moustache. For me and probably other people who like Carrere. Le Moustache is kind of more of a character piece, I guess is the best way to put it. It tells us about Carrere in a different way. It is a different story. The writing is a little quicker, a little softer, a little lighter. The last book that we reviewed is Vitres. And I can't rate this book. It would be like rating a history book about 9/11 written by somebody who was in the attacks and who had been to trial. So it's not exactly the situation, but it has the same kind of heft as that. That this book is so recognized, and the project it is, makes me a very strong believer in that Carrere will likely be around for quite some time, at least as concerns that book. That book, to me, seems like something that might wind up having historical significance. So, do I have anything else to say about Emmanuel Carrere before we wrap this up? Generally not really. I hope you like the t-shirt today. This is Georges Perec, author of Vie Mode d'Emploi, the Life of Users Manual. I appreciate you indulging me with my terribly accented French, and I'm trying to build your enthusiasm for the books that have brought me so much joy. I had wanted to make a video on a French author. I was feeling pressed, and I don't want to have promised something in French and not delivered. So I don't know when this will be released exactly. It's going to be probably a week after I finish making it. But in general, I wanted to build an episode in French. Well, I don't know if there's anything else to say. I loved reading Emmanuel Carrere, and I hope that you guys take the time to look into him. I think you'll enjoy him as well. All right, thanks. Several books out. Bye-bye.